On Christmas Eve, my parents handed a brand new high-tech drone to the supposed future leader of our family legacy, while my 6-year-old children received cheap industrial cleaning aprons. My nephew laughed as he unwrapped his gift and told my twins to get the mud off his designer boots, because that was what the help was for. I did not cause a scene. I did not scream or flip the dinner table. I simply stood up and left. The next morning, I discovered that my parents and brother had stolen the source code of my life's work to build their new business empire. They thought I was just a quiet doormat who would accept their scraps. They were wrong. I sat at my computer and sent one single command: execute kill switch. My name is Zora, and at 34 years old, I am the architect of my own fortune, but to my family, I am nothing more than a servant born to elevate my brother. Before I reveal exactly how I destroyed their $50 million launch event live on stage, please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Tell me in the comments if you have ever been the family scapegoat who finally decided to bite back. I am standing here in my Chicago penthouse, looking out through floor-to-ceiling windows at the city lights swirling in the winter snow. It is a view that costs millions, but tonight it feels cold and distant. It is hard to believe that just 48 hours ago I was shivering in a drafty hallway, being told I was worthless by the people who gave birth to me. The silence in my apartment is heavy, but it is peaceful, unlike the chaotic and terrifying drive that started this nightmare. I remember the blizzard pounding relentlessly against the windshield of my 10-year-old sedan as I navigated the treacherous icy roads toward my parents' sprawling estate. In the rearview mirror, I saw my twins Leo and Maya clutching their seatbelts until their little knuckles turned white. Most children are excited about Santa coming on Christmas Eve, but my children were terrified of their grandparents. The air in the car was thick with anxiety. "Mommy, will Grandma Verna like my drawing this time?" Leo asked, his voice trembling as he held a crumpled piece of paper. My heart shattered into a million pieces. I remembered last year when my mother used his art to light the fireplace because she said clutter gave her a migraine. I gripped the steering wheel, fighting back tears, and promised myself I would protect them tonight. I forced a smile and told them Grandma would love it, but deep down I knew I was lying. The knot in my stomach tightened with every mile we drove closer to that house. It was not a home. It was a fortress of expectations I could never meet. I could feel the old familiar dread rising in my throat, the feeling of being small and inadequate that I had spent years trying to escape. I had no idea that walking through those double oak doors would force me to burn my entire family tree to the ground. We were not just driving to a holiday dinner. We were driving straight into an ambush. My rusted sedan wheezed as I finally parked at the end of the winding driveway. It looked like a bruised tin can sitting next to the manicured hedges and marble statues that lined the entrance of my parents' estate. I took a deep breath and unbuckled the twins. "Remember what I told you," I whispered. "Best behavior." We walked up the stone steps hand in hand. The front door swung open before I could even ring the bell, but there were no warm smiles waiting for us. My father Otis stood there checking his gold Rolex while my mother Verna scanned my outfit with a look of disappointment that I knew all too well. "You are late, Zora," my father said without making eye contact. "We are actually 5 minutes early." "Dad," I replied, keeping my voice steady. He ignored me and looked past my shoulder toward the street. "Where is your brother? He is the one we are waiting for." As if on cue, the aggressive growl of a twin-turbo engine cut through the winter silence. A sleek midnight black Porsche Cayenne pulled into the driveway and parked aggressively close to my car, blocking me in. The change in my parents' demeanor was instant and nauseating. My mother patted her hair into place, and my father's chest puffed out with pride. "Now the party can start," he declared, completely forgetting that his daughter and grandchildren were standing right in front of him, shivering in the cold. Marcus stepped out of the driver's seat, wearing a bespoke Italian suit that probably cost more than my entire tuition. He tossed his keys to the valet my parents had hired specifically for tonight. Then the passenger door opened and his wife Tiffany emerged. She was wrapped in a white fur coat that looked pristine against the dirty snow. She glided up the stairs, bypassing me entirely, to embrace my mother. "Oh, Verna, you look absolutely radiant tonight," she cooed, in that high-pitched voice that always sounded fake to my ears. We finally shuffled inside the foyer, trying to be invisible. My son Leo stepped onto the entryway mat to wipe his boots. Suddenly, Tiffany gasped, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. She pointed a manicured finger at Leo's feet, as if he had just brought a live grenade into the house. "Oh my God, Zora! Watch your children! That is a genuine Persian silk rug imported from Iran. Look at the mud on his boots." She looked at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. "I know you are used to different standards of living, dear, but please try to respect the house." My mother rushed over immediately, not to check on her grandson, but to inspect the floor. "Get them off the carpet," Verna snapped at me. "Take them to the kitchen entrance, Zora. You know better than to bring outside filth into the formal foyer." I stood there humiliated while Marcus chuckled and slapped our father on the back, walking into the warm living room, leaving us alone in the cold hallway. The dining room was silent except for the aggressive clinking of silver knives against porcelain plates. It sounded less like a holiday meal and more like a sword fight. I focused on cutting my steak into tiny, precise squares, just to keep my hands from shaking, while my children ate quietly beside me, afraid to make a sound. Tiffany broke the tension by waving her fork around like a conductor baton. She took a long sip of vintage wine and sighed dramatically. "You know, Marcus and I were just saying that the Amalfi Coast is simply divine this time of year. We had the most incredible espresso in Positano last month." She turned her gaze toward me, her eyes scanning my simple department store dress. "But I suppose international travel is difficult when you are on a strict budget, right, Zora?" I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. I wanted to tell her that I had spent last October in Tokyo consulting for a robotics firm and flying first class, but to them, I was just a struggling single mother. My father Otis cleared his throat and wiped his mouth with a linen napkin. "Travel is for people with global vision, Zora. Marcus is building a legacy. He has the mind of a CEO. He understands how to expand the family name." My mother Verna nodded in agreement, placing her hand affectionately on Marcus' shoulder. "Exactly, Otis. Marcus is out there meeting people, shaking hands, and making real deals. Zora, you are just, what do you call it? A coder. You just sit in a dark room and type on a keyboard all day like a secretary. It is not exactly a career we can boast about at the country club, is it?" The insult landed like a physical slap. Marcus leaned back in his chair looking smug. "Come on, Mom, do not be too hard on her. Someone has to fix the printers when they jam right." He winked at me across the table. "Besides, I might need Zora to look at my new laptop later. It is acting slow, and you know how she loves her little computer games." The table erupted in polite laughter. Even my children looked down at their plates, sensing the mockery. They did not see a chief technology officer. They saw a failure. I swallowed the dry turkey and the insult together. I watched my parents look at my brother with adoration while looking at me with pity. They had no idea that the computer games they mocked were actually complex algorithms that powered half the logistics networks in the city. I wanted to scream that I owned patents worth more than this entire house, but I knew the time for truth was coming. Just not yet. So I simply raised my glass of water and smiled a cold, hollow smile. "You are right, Marcus. I am just good with computers. Remember that." The living room smelled of pine and expensive cologne as we gathered around the towering Christmas tree. My mother Verna played the role of benevolent matriarch, handing out gifts with a theatrical flair that made my stomach turn. She picked up a massive box wrapped in gold foil and handed it to Marcus' son Jalen. "Go ahead, sweetie, open it," she beamed. Jalen tore through the paper like a wild animal, revealing a brand new DJI Mavic drone, worth at least $2,000, along with the latest iPad Pro. "Whoa, cool!" Jalen shouted, immediately losing interest in his grandparents to stare at the screen. Marcus clapped his hands. "That is for the future leader of the family business. You need the best tech to stay ahead, son." My twins Leo and Maya sat quietly on the floor, their eyes wide with anticipation. They had been so good all night despite the insults. My mother reached behind the tree and pulled out two thin, flat packages wrapped in brown paper. "Here you go," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "Something practical for you two." My heart hammered against my ribs as Leo and Maya carefully peeled back the paper. Their smiles faded instantly. Inside were not toys or games. They were gray industrial cleaning aprons and a set of cheap plastic scrub brushes. There was also a box of half-used crayons that looked like they had been dug out of a donation bin. Silence fell over the room. I looked at my mother, waiting for the punchline, waiting for her to say it was a joke, and bring out the real gifts. But she just sipped her wine. "What is wrong?" she asked innocently. "Those are sturdy. You can help your mother around the house." Marcus let out a loud barking laugh that made my skin crawl. "Hey, that is actually perfect. Start them young, right, Zora? Someone has to know how to clean up after the leaders of the world." Jalen looked up from his iPad and sneered at my son. "Yeah, get the mud off my boots like Mom said." Tiffany giggled, covering her mouth with a diamond-encrusted hand. "Oh, stop it, Marcus, you are terrible." "But really, Zora, it teaches them work ethic. We cannot all be born to rule. Some people are born to serve." That was it. The final thread of my patience snapped. I did not scream. I did not cry. I felt a cold, deadly calm wash over me. I stood up slowly and walked over to the fireplace where a crackling fire was burning. I took the box of broken crayons from Leo's trembling hands. "Zora, what are you doing?" my father barked. I tossed the crayons into the flames and watched the wax melt and hiss. "I am teaching them a lesson, Dad," I said, my voice steady and lethal. "I am teaching them that we do not accept trash from people who treat us like trash." The room went deadly silent, expecting me to scream or cry. Tiffany actually had her phone halfway out of her purse, ready to record my breakdown for her social media, but I refused to give them the show they wanted. I felt a cold clarity wash over me, a sudden realization that I had spent decades begging for love from people who were incapable of giving it. I stood up slowly and walked toward the grand marble fireplace where the logs were crackling. I held the box of broken crayons and the gray industrial cleaning aprons in my hands. "Zora, what do you think you are doing?" my mother asked, her voice trembling with confusion rather than concern. I did not answer. I simply tossed the insulting gifts directly into the roaring flames. The fire hissed as it consumed the paper, and the plastic wrappers curled and blackened in the heat. The smell of burning wax filled the room, mixing with the scent of expensive pine. It was the smell of bridges burning. I turned my back on the fire and looked at my children, who were watching me with wide, fearful eyes. "Put your coats on, Leo, Maya," I said calmly. "We are leaving. Now." My twins did not argue. They scrambled to grab their jackets, sensing the shift in power. As I ushered them toward the hallway, my father finally found his voice. He stood up, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "You walk out that door, Zora, and you are done. Do you hear me? You are cut off. No inheritance, no trust fund. You will not get a single dime from this family when we die." Marcus laughed nervously, trying to regain control of the situation. "Let her go, Dad. She will be back begging for money in a week. She always comes back." I stopped at the heavy double oak doors and turned back one last time. I looked at the crystal chandelier, the velvet furniture, and the people who were supposed to love me. I looked at the fear in my mother's eyes and the arrogance in my father's stance. I tightened my grip on my children's hands, feeling their warmth. "I do not want your money, Dad," I said, my voice echoing in the large foyer. "You can keep every single cent. In fact, you should save it. You are going to need it to pay for your heart medication when you realize exactly what you have lost tonight." I opened the door and the biting winter wind rushed in, but for the first time in years I did not feel cold. I felt free. I slammed the heavy door shut behind us, blocking out the warmth of the fire and the toxicity of my bloodline. As we walked down the snowy steps to my old car, I did not look back. I did not know yet that by the time the sun rose the next morning, They would steal my intellectual property and start a war. But in that moment, I knew one thing. I was done being the victim. The drive back to the city was brutal. The silence in the back seat was louder than the howling wind outside. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw my twins staring out at the passing streetlights, their faces streaked with silent tears. They did not sob or complain, which somehow made it worse. They had learned to be quiet to survive, just like I had. Finally, from the darkness of the back seat, Leo spoke up. "Mommy, why do Grandma and Grandpa hate us?" The question hit me harder than any physical blow. I gripped the steering wheel so tight, my knuckles turned white. I wanted to scream. I wanted to turn the car around and burn that mansion to the ground. But I forced myself to take a deep, steady breath. "They do not hate you, baby," I said, keeping my voice soft and firm. "They just have broken eyes. They cannot see how special you are. But I see you. I see you, and that is all that matters." I promised myself right then and there that the cycle of trauma ended with me. My children would never again step foot in that house. We arrived at our apartment building just as the clock struck midnight. I carried them inside one by one, tucking them into their warm beds, safely away from the toxicity of the Williams family legacy. I kissed their foreheads and walked into the living room, pouring myself a glass of red wine to calm my shaking nerves. I walked to the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline, feeling a strange mixture of grief and relief. I had lost my family, but I had kept my dignity. I thought the worst was over. I thought I could just cut ties and move on with my life. I was wrong. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, vibrating against the marble surface. I assumed it was a hateful text from my mother or a gloating message from Tiffany. I almost ignored it. But the vibration pattern was different. It was a rapid, continuous buzzing. A security alert. I picked up the phone and my blood ran cold. It was not a text message. It was a critical notification from my private server. Unauthorized access detected. Project Aura source code is being downloaded. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Project Aura was my life work. A revolutionary AI logistics system I had been building in secret for 3 years. It was encrypted on a private server that only I had access to. Or so I thought. I tapped the screen to trace the IP address of the intruder. The location flashed on the map and I felt the room spin. The signal was coming from 1500 Oak Ridge Drive. My parents' estate. Specifically the guest Wi-Fi network in the study where I had left my old laptop during Thanksgiving. A cold realization washed over me. This was not just about favoritism. This was not just about insults. While they were distracting me with cleaning aprons and cruel jokes downstairs, my brother Marcus had been upstairs stealing my future. I set my wine glass down. I did not cry. I did not panic. I walked to my home office and booted up my main computer. If they wanted a war, they just declared one. I sat in my home office surrounded by the humming of servers and the glow of 3 monitors. It was 5 in the morning on Christmas Day, but I had not slept a wink. The red alert on my screen was pulsing like a heartbeat. Unauthorized data transfer complete. I typed in a command to access the access logs, my fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. The system showed a massive download of 3 terabytes of data. This was not just a few files. It was everything. The source code for Project Aura, the proprietary algorithms for autonomous logistics, and even my personal notes on future AI architecture. I traced the digital footprint back to its origin. The IP address stared back at me like a loaded gun. It was 192.168.145, coming directly from the residential gateway at 1500 Oak Ridge Drive. My parents' house. Specifically, it came from the old desktop computer in the guest study, the one place I thought was safe. I realized with a sickening jolt that I had left my GitHub Enterprise account logged in on that machine during Thanksgiving break when I was fixing my father's email. I had trusted them. I had been careless. I pulled up the security camera footage from the study which I had installed years ago to keep an eye on my aging father. I rewound the tape to last night. There on the grainy black and white screen was my brother Marcus. He was not alone. He was on the phone with someone. I turned up the volume on the audio feed. "Yeah, I am in," Marcus whispered. "It is all here just like you said, Tiffany. The code is worth millions. We just need to copy it to the external drive." I watched as he plugged in a drive and started the transfer. He looked nervous, checking the door every few seconds. Then my mother walked in. I held my breath, hoping she would stop him. Hoping she would be the moral compass I desperately wanted her to be. Instead, she walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Hurry up, son," she said. "Zora will be here any minute. Make sure you get everything before she arrives. We need this for your future." I stared at the screen, feeling the bile rise in my throat. They had planned this, the dinner, the insults, the cheap gifts. It was all a distraction to keep me occupied while they robbed me blind. They did not just steal my work, they stole my trust. I leaned back in my chair and let out a long, shaky breath. Most people would have called the police. Most people would have called a lawyer, but I was not most people. I was a coder, and in my world, you do not just block a hacker, you let them in. You let them think they have won, and then you rewrite the code to destroy them from the inside out. I opened a new terminal window. If they wanted my code, they could have it, but they were going to get a few extra features they did not bargain for. I walked into the living room hoping for coffee and silence, but instead I walked straight into a nightmare. I turned on the television to the local business news channel, and the headline at the bottom of the screen made my blood run cold. "Local entrepreneur unveils revolutionary AI platform." And there he was. Marcus was sitting in a studio chair looking polished and confident, wearing the same bespoke Italian suit he had worn to humiliate me the night before. Next to him sat Tiffany, beaming like a proud trophy wife, her hand resting possessively on his knee. The news anchor leaned in with admiration. "So Marcus, tell us about this game-changing technology called Titan Logistics." I felt the room spin. Titan. He had not even bothered to change the codename I used in my early drafts. Marcus cleared his throat and smiled, that practiced, charming smile that had fooled our parents for decades. "Well, Jim, I have always believed that efficiency is the backbone of the American dream. Titan is an autonomous system that predicts supply chain disruptions before they happen. It is not just software, it is the future." I watched in horror as my exact presentation slides appeared on the screen behind him. The graphs, the data points, even the specific blue and silver color scheme I had agonizingly chosen to represent data flow. It was all there. My intellectual property plastered on national television with his name on it. He was reciting my pitch word for word. Phrases I had written in my private journals years ago were now rolling off his tongue as if he had birthed them himself. It was a performance of stolen valor so brazen, it was almost impressive. I stared at the screen as he pointed to a complex diagram of a neural network node. "That is the core of our processing engine," he lied smoothly. I actually laughed out loud, a dry, bitter sound in the empty room. That was not a processing engine. That was a diagram I drew on a napkin 3 years ago to explain the concept to my father, who still did not understand it. Marcus did not even know what he was pointing at. He was just a trained monkey performing a trick. The anchor turned to Tiffany. "And you must be so proud of your husband." Tiffany giggled and flipped her hair. "Oh, absolutely. He has been working so hard on this in his home office. Countless late nights. He is truly a genius." I gripped the remote control so hard the plastic creaked in my hand. Late nights. The only thing Marcus worked on late at night was his high score in video games. He did not know the first thing about neural networks or machine learning. If the reporter asked him one single technical question, the entire charade would crumble. But they did not ask. They just praised him. They saw a handsome man in a suit and a beautiful white wife, and they bought the lie hook, line, and sinker. I turned off the television, plunging the room into silence. My parents had bet everything on this lie. They had handed him my crown because he was the son. But they forgot that a king who does not know how to rule is just a man waiting to be overthrown. I picked up my phone. It was time to give the new king a few problems he could not charm his way out of. 2 hours after Marcus finished his fraudulent television debut, my phone began to buzz incessantly on the coffee table. It was my mother, Verna. I stared at the caller ID, feeling a mixture of rage and curiosity. I swiped right and put the phone to my ear, without saying a word, waiting for her to speak first. Zora, you need to come home immediately. My mother's voice was sharp and commanding, as if she had not just facilitated the theft of my intellectual property. We are having a family meeting to discuss the future of the company, and your brother wants to offer you an opportunity. An opportunity. The audacity was breathtaking. They steal my work, rename it, and then summon me like a naughty child to offer me a crumb from the table. I realized in that moment that they did not know I knew the extent of the theft. They thought I was too stupid to recognize my own code, or perhaps too passive to do anything about it. They underestimated me, and that was going to be their fatal mistake. I will be there in 30 minutes, I said coldly, and hung up before she could say another word. I went to my closet, but I did not reach for a dress. I reached for my tactical gear. I pulled out a small, high-definition digital voice recorder about the size of a stick of gum. It was a professional-grade device I used for recording client meetings, but today it would serve a much darker purpose. I clipped it discreetly to the underside of my bra strap, ensuring the microphone was positioned perfectly to capture every whisper in that room, even through layers of fabric. I threw on a sharp black blazer and checked my reflection in the mirror. I did not look like the heartbroken daughter who had fled into the snow on Christmas Eve. I looked like an executive. I looked like a predator. The drive to the estate was different this time. The roads were clear, and so was my mind. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw that the house was lit up like a beacon of victory. There were already 3 other cars there: consultants, lawyers, and financial advisors. The vultures were already circling the carcass of a company built on a lie. I walked up the steps and did not wait to be invited in. I pushed the double doors open, and the sound of popping champagne corks greeted me. They were celebrating. My father, Otis, was raising a crystal flute in the center of the foyer, his face flushed with excitement and alcohol. To Marcus, he shouted, his voice booming off the marble walls. To the visionary of the family, the room erupted in applause. I stood in the archway, my hand resting casually on my chest right over the hidden microphone. I pressed the record button and felt a tiny vibration against my skin, confirming that the device was active. I took a deep breath and stepped into the light, ready to play the role of the submissive sister one last time. The game was on, and I had the ultimate advantage. They thought they were writing the rules, but I was recording every single violation. The dining room felt less like a family gathering and more like a court-martial. I stood at the end of the long mahogany table while my family sat comfortably sipping their champagne. The air was thick with the smell of expensive cologne and betrayal. My father, Otis, gestured for me to sit, but I remained standing. I wanted to keep my distance, and I wanted the recorder to catch every syllable clearly. "You have a lot of nerve summoning me here after what I saw on the news," I said, keeping my voice level. My father chuckled and swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "Oh, stop being dramatic, Zora. We did not summon you. We invited you to be part of the success." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. His eyes bore into mine with a mix of pity and frustration. "Let us be real for a second. Look at you. You are a single mother. You are tired. You are emotional. Do you really think Silicon Valley investors are going to hand millions of dollars to someone like you?" The insult hung in the air. I pressed my hand against my chest, feeling the warmth of the hidden device. "So, because I am a woman, I cannot lead a tech company. Is that it?" I asked, pushing him to say it explicitly. Otis slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "It is not about fairness, Zora. It is about optics. It is about business. Marcus has the presence. He has the charisma. When he walks into a room, people want to give him money. When you walk in, they ask you to get them coffee. We simply took your raw material and gave it the packaging it needed to sell. It is a family strategy. My mother Verna chimed in from the other end of the table, nodding in agreement. Your father is right, dear. We did this for you. You do not have the stomach for the sharks in this industry. Marcus is protecting you. You should be thanking him, not accusing him. I looked at Marcus, who was busy checking his reflection in a spoon. He did not even have the decency to look ashamed. He just shrugged. Teamwork makes the dream work, sis. Besides, I am the one who has to wear the suit and do the talking. You just wrote the code. That is the easy part. The room spun slightly. They had completely rationalized their theft. In their twisted minds, they were the heroes saving the family legacy from my incompetence. They truly believed that my gender and my quiet nature made my property theirs for the taking. I looked at my father and asked one final question to seal their fate. So just to be clear, Titan Logistics is 100% my code. Project Aura repackaged under Marcus' name because you do not think a woman can be CEO. My father raised his glass in a mock toast. Exactly. Now sit down and let's discuss your finder fee. I sat down not because I agreed, but because I had everything I needed. Tiffany reached into her oversized Birkin bag and pulled out a single sheet of crisp white paper. She slid it across the mahogany table with a perfectly manicured finger until it rested right in front of me. This is for you, Zora, she said with a smile that did not reach her cold blue eyes. We took the liberty of drawing up a contract so you can be officially involved. I looked down at the document. The header read, Independent Contractor Agreement. I scanned the terms and my jaw almost hit the floor. There was no equity. There were no stock options. There was not even a salary. Under the compensation section, it listed an hourly rate of $20. $20 an hour to consult on a $50 million project that I built from scratch. I looked up at her, waiting for the punchline. Is this a joke? I asked. Tiffany sighed and exchanged a look with my mother like I was being an unruly toddler. Oh, Zora, do not be ungrateful. $20 is very generous for a consultant with no corporate experience. We checked the market rates for administrative assistants, and this is actually above average. Administrative assistant. The rage boiled in my blood, but I forced my breathing to stay even. The microphone against my chest felt heavy. So I am an admin now? I asked, my voice flat. Tiffany leaned forward, her diamond earrings catching the light. Look, sweetie, we know you write good code. You are a wizard at the keyboard, really, but you lack the executive presence required for a leadership role. You are too quiet. You are too abrasive. You just do not fit the image of a modern tech leader. Marcus has that natural charisma. You are better suited for the back office where you do not have to talk to investors. She tapped the paper with her pen. Just sign it, Zora. Do it for Mom and Dad. Look how happy they are. Do not ruin this night for them with your ego. I looked at my parents. They were beaming, raising their glasses in anticipation. They truly believed they were doing me a favor. They were stripping me of my creation and handing me crumbs, and they expected me to say thank you. I picked up the pen. My hand did not shake. I knew exactly what I was doing. If they wanted a signature, I would give them one. It would be the key that unlocked their destruction. I lowered the pen to the paper and prepared to seal their fate. I stared at the heavy gold-plated fountain pen resting on the document. It was my father's pen, the one he used to sign mortgage papers and loan agreements. Now he was offering it to me to sign away my dignity. I knew that if I signed this paper too quickly, they would get suspicious. They needed to see me break. They needed to see me defeated. So I put on the performance of a lifetime. I let my hand tremble visibly as I reached for the pen. I hunched my shoulders, making myself look smaller and weaker in the oversized leather chair. I looked up at my mother one last time, letting my eyes fill with unshed tears. Do I really have to do this, Mom? I asked, my voice cracking perfectly. Verna sighed and took a sip of her water. Oh, for heaven's sake, Zora, stop making this so difficult. We are trying to help you build a resume. Just sign the paper so we can celebrate. Marcus tapped his foot impatiently on the hardwood floor. Come on, sis. The champagne is getting warm. Do not be selfish. I took a deep, shaky breath and lowered the pen to the paper. The sound of the nib scratching against the page sounded like a scream in the quiet room. I signed my name slowly and messily, making it look like the signature of a broken woman. Zora Williams. I put the pen down and pushed the contract across the table. There. It is done, I whispered, staring at my hands. Tiffany snatched the paper away instantly. She scanned the signature like a hawk checking for a forgery before flashing a triumphant smile. Perfect. See, that was not so hard, was it? Not so. She carefully folded the contract and placed it into her designer bag as if it were a winning lottery ticket. The ink was barely dry when the mood in the room shifted from tense to jubilant. My father clapped his hands together loudly. Outstanding. Now that the paperwork is out of the way, let us properly toast to the new CEO of Titan Logistics. Marcus grabbed a bottle of Dom Perignon from the silver ice bucket. With a loud pop, the cork flew across the room and hit the wall. White foam spilled over the sides of the bottle, but he did not care. He poured 4 glasses of champagne, filling them to the brim. He handed one to Tiffany, one to Mom, and one to Dad. He raised his own glass high in the air. To Titan, he shouted. To the Williams legacy, my father echoed, his face flushed with pride. They clinked their glasses together, the crystal singing in the air. They drank deeply, laughing and patting each other on the back. I sat there at the end of the table with my hands folded in my lap. They did not pour a glass for me. They did not even look at me. In their eyes, I had served my purpose. I was just the stepping stone they had walked on to get to the top. I watched them celebrate their theft. I watched them toast to a future that did not belong to them. But under my blazer, the red light of the voice recorder was still blinking. I had the contract. I had the admission of guilt. And now, I had the access. They thought I had just signed a surrender, but I had actually just signed their death warrant. Tiffany slid the company laptop across the table towards me, almost knocking over a champagne flute in her haste. Here, she said, taking another sip of wine. The login portal keeps crashing, and the investors need to see the dashboard tomorrow. Fix it, consultant. I opened the laptop, and the familiar blue glow of the screen illuminated my face. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The room was loud with the sounds of their premature celebration. Marcus was bragging loudly about buying a yacht next summer. My father was discussing which exclusive country club he would finally join. They were so drunk on their own ego that they did not notice the wolf sitting right in their living room. I typed in my old administrative credentials, which amazingly, they had not even bothered to change. The terminal window opened, a black box of infinite possibility. I quickly patched the login error. It was a simple syntax error that any junior developer could have spotted in seconds. But I did not stop there. I navigated deeper into the system architecture, down to the kernel level, where the heart of the software beat. I opened a new hidden directory and began to type. This was not a bug fix. This was an execution order. I named the executable project reclaim.exe. It was a dormant command designed to override all administrative privileges and lock the system down completely upon my signal. I disguised the file as a standard system security update, so it would pass any superficial audit Marcus might try to run. My heart was pounding against my ribs, but my hands were steady as rock. I wrote the trigger code. It would listen for a specific sequence of network packets that only I could send from my remote server. Once received, it would not just stop the software. It would display a copyright notice on every connected screen and automatically email the original source code logs to the entire investor contact list. I watched the green progress bar load. 20%. Marcus laughed loudly at a joke I did not hear. 50%. Tiffany was talking about remodeling the kitchen with Italian marble. 80%. My mother asked if I wanted a glass of water, finally remembering I was there. I ignored her. 99% upload complete. Upload. The trap was set. The bomb was armed and the detonator was in my pocket. I closed the terminal window and cleared the history logs, leaving no trace of my sabotage. I shut the laptop with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot to my ears. "It is fixed," I said, sliding the computer back to Tiffany. "You should be able to log in now." Tiffany glanced at the screen and smiled condescendingly. "See? I knew you would be useful for the small stuff." She had no idea that she was holding a grenade, and I had just pulled the pin. For the next 14 days, Titan Logistics ran like a dream. The code I had written was flawless. It processed orders, predicted shipping delays, and optimized delivery routes with terrifying efficiency. My family was on cloud nine. Marcus was strutting around the office like he was the next Elon Musk, taking credit for every successful algorithm prediction. My parents were already looking at vacation homes in the Hamptons, convinced that their financial gamble had paid off. Tiffany stopped looking at me with disdain and started looking right through me as if I were part of the office furniture. They thought they had won. They thought the technology was self-sustaining, and that my role was just a formality to keep the peace. I let them believe it. I sat in my apartment every night watching the server logs scroll by like a digital waterfall. I was not just a spectator. I was the puppet master holding the strings. I let them have their moment in the sun because I knew that the higher they climbed, the harder they would fall. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, just as Marcus was about to demo the dashboard to a mid-level regional manager, I decided to tug on one of those strings. I did not trigger the kill switch yet. That was for the grand finale. Instead, I executed a simple command to throttle the server bandwidth by 40%. It was a minor inconvenience mathematically, but visually it was a disaster. The smooth real-time map on the dashboard began to lag. The spinning loading wheel appeared and refused to go away. My phone rang within 3 minutes. It was Marcus. I let it ring twice before picking up. "Zora, the system is crashing," he screamed into the receiver, his voice cracking with panic. "We have a client in the conference room, and the map is frozen. Fix it. Fix it now." I took a slow sip of my tea. "Calm down, Marcus," I said, keeping my voice bored and professional. "It looks like a server overload. You probably have too many unnecessary processes running. Let me clear the cache." I tapped a single key on my keyboard, instantly restoring the bandwidth. "Try it now." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a sigh of relief so loud it distorted the audio. "Okay, it is working again." "God, that was close. You need to make sure that never happens again, Zora. Do your job." He hung up without saying thank you. I stared at the phone and smiled. They were completely helpless without me. They were driving a race car at 200 miles per hour, but I was the one controlling the brakes. The test was a success. They trusted me to fix the problems they did not understand, and that trust would be their undoing. 3 months passed in a blur of headlines and champagne toasts. Everywhere I turned, I saw my brother's face. He was on billboards downtown. He was featured in sponsored ads on my social media feed. And finally, he achieved the holy grail of vanity, the cover of the local edition of Forbes magazine. I stood in the grocery store checkout line, staring at the glossy image. Marcus was leaning against a server rack with his arms crossed, looking like the visionary genius he pretended to be. The bold yellow text next to his head read, "The $50 million Man, How Marcus Williams is Reinventing Logistics." I bought the magazine not because I wanted a keepsake, but because I needed evidence of the height of their delusion. I took it home and read the interview while eating takeout in my dim living room. It was a masterpiece of fiction. Marcus spoke about sleepless nights coding in the basement. He talked about the eureka moment when the algorithm clicked. He even dedicated the success to our parents for believing in his raw talent. There was not a single mention of me, not even as a consultant. To the world, Zora Williams did not exist. Titan Logistics was solely the brainchild of the Golden Sun. The valuation of the company had skyrocketed to $50 million, based entirely on the projections generated by my software. Venture capitalists were lining up to throw money at them. I watched from the shadows as my parents walked red carpets at charity galas dripping in new jewelry bought with loans secured against the company future value. They were living the life they always believed they deserved. Meanwhile, I continued to play my part. I answered their frantic texts when they forgot passwords. I sent weekly status reports that were just technical enough to confuse them, but positive enough to keep them complacent. They thought my silence was submission. They thought I had accepted my place as the invisible engine room of their luxury liner. They did not realize that I was not just the mechanic. I was the captain. And I was steering them straight into an iceberg. Every dollar they accepted from investors was another nail in their legal coffin. Every interview Marcus gave claiming authorship was another count of fraud. I tracked every single lie in a spreadsheet that was now hundreds of rows long. I was not hiding in the dark. I was waiting for the perfect moment to turn on the lights. The level of delusion in my family reached completely new heights on a rainy Tuesday morning. My parents summoned me to the estate, not for a scolding this time, but to witness what they called a historic moment for the Williams dynasty. When I walked into the study, the room smelled of old leather and fresh ink. A banker was packing up his briefcase, looking extremely pleased with himself. My father Otis was holding a pen with a shaking hand, not from fear, but from adrenaline. He looked at me with wild eyes. "You are just in time, Zora. We just signed the papers. We are going all in." I looked at the documents on the heavy oak desk. They were loan agreements. Massive ones. My stomach turned as I read the bold print. They had taken out a second mortgage on the estate. They had liquidated their retirement accounts. They had even leveraged the small rental properties my grandfather had bought with his bare hands 70 years ago. The total capital injection was $2 million. All of it was going directly into the operating account of Titan Logistics to fund a global expansion. I looked at my mother Verna. She was beaming, looking at Marcus as if he were the second coming. "We believe in you, son," she said softly. "We know you are going to turn this into billions. This is just seed money." Marcus did not even look grateful. He looked entitled. He took the check from the banker and folded it into his pocket like it was lunch money. "Thanks, Mom. Thanks, Dad. You will not regret this. I am going to buy you an island when we go public next year." I stood there feeling a strange mixture of sorrow and disgust. That house was not just a building. It was the legacy of my grandparents who had worked in factories and cleaned floors so that we could have a roof over our heads. And now their son was gambling it all away on a lie. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab my father by the shoulders and shake him. I wanted to tell him that Titan Logistics was a hollow shell that I could collapse with a single keystroke. But I bit my tongue. Napoleon once said, "Never interrupt your enemy when he is making a mistake." And this was a fatal mistake. By signing those papers, my parents had tied their survival to a sinking ship. They had removed their own safety net. If Titan failed, they would be homeless. If Titan failed, they would be destitute. I looked at the portrait of my grandfather hanging over the fireplace. His eyes seemed to follow me, sad and knowing. "I am sorry, Grandpa," I thought to myself. "But they have to learn the hard way." I poured myself a cup of coffee and raised it in a silent toast to the banker. He had just made the easiest commission of his life, and my parents had just signed their own eviction notice. The piercing sound of my ringtone shattered the silence of my bedroom at exactly 2:14 in the morning. I did not need to look at the caller ID to know who it was. Only one person in my life had the audacity to demand my attention while the rest of the world slept. I slid my finger across the screen to answer, and before I could even say hello, a wall of noise hit me. "Zora, you useless consultant. The entire dashboard is red. Everything is down. Fix it right now, or I will sue you for breach of contract." It was Marcus. He sounded hysterical, and judging by the slur in his words, he was also drunk. I sat up in bed and calmly tapped the record button on my call app. This was going to be gold. "Marcus, please lower your voice," I said. keeping my tone even and professional. Tell me exactly what the error message says. There was a crashing sound on the other end, as if he had thrown something. I do not know what it says, Zora. It is just a bunch of numbers and code. I am a CEO, not a nerd. That is what I pay you $20 an hour for. Now make the red lights go away before the Asian markets open, or I swear to God I will destroy you. I took a deep breath. The error was likely a simple cache overflow, a minor issue that occurred when the system was left running for weeks without maintenance. A real engineer would have fixed it in 30 seconds. Marcus, I need you to walk over to the main server rack in your home office. Are you there? I heard him shuffling across the room, cursing under his breath. Yeah, I am here. What do I do? Kick it. No, Marcus. I need you to plug in the keyboard and type a command. I need you to restart the Apache service. Silence followed, long, heavy silence. Then his voice came back smaller and terrified. What is the Apache service? How do I type a command? There is no mouse. I smiled in the darkness. He did not even know how to use a command line interface. The man who was on the cover of Forbes magazine claiming to be a tech genius could not even reboot a server. Okay, Marcus, listen carefully, I said, speaking to him like a slow child. Just press the power button, hold it for 10 seconds until the lights turn off. Then press it again. It is called a hard reset. He did as he was told. Is it working? He asked anxiously. Yes, Marcus, it is rebooting. It will be back online in 2 minutes. He did not say thank you. He did not apologize for waking me up. He just hung up the phone. I saved the recording and named it Evidence of Incompetence File 01. He thought he was giving orders, but he was actually giving me the ammunition I needed to prove he was a fraud. While Marcus was busy panicking over server reboots and playing the role of a stressed technology tycoon, his wife Tiffany was busy ensuring the company went bankrupt in style. As the self-appointed chief branding officer, she apparently believed that the best way to build a brand was to wear it. I sat in my home office watching the transaction alerts scroll across my third monitor like a ticker tape of financial suicide. My phone buzzed every few hours with a new notification from the corporate American Express Black Card. The spending was not just irresponsible, it was criminal. On Monday morning, she spent $12,000 at the Hermes boutique in downtown Chicago. On the expense report, she categorized it as client gifting. I looked at the itemized receipt. It was a Birkin bag in rose gold. Unless she was gifting it to herself, there was no client involved. By Wednesday, she had dropped another $5,000 at an exclusive day spa, listing it as employee wellness. The only employee getting well was her. But the breaking point came on Friday. I received a fraud alert for a purchase of $85,000. I assumed the card had been stolen. I logged into the banking portal immediately ready to freeze the account. But then I saw the merchant name, Land Rover of North Chicago. Tiffany had bought a brand new luxury SUV using the seed money my parents had mortgaged their home to provide. I checked her Instagram story 10 minutes later. There she was posing in front of a white Range Rover holding a giant red bow. The caption read, "New company car. Mommy needs a smooth ride to meetings. Hashtag boss babe. Hashtag Titan Logistics." I felt a cold knot of fury in my stomach, but I did not call her. I did not text Marcus. I did what a forensic accountant would do. I started building a case file. I took screenshots of every single Instagram post where she flaunted the goods. I downloaded every digital receipt. I cross-referenced the timestamps of her shopping sprees with the times she claimed to be in strategy meetings. I created a dedicated folder on my encrypted drive named Embezzlement Evidence. They were burning through capital at a rate of $50,000 a week. At this pace, the company would be insolvent in 6 months. My parents thought the money was going towards server farms and software engineers. They thought they were investing in infrastructure. In reality, they were funding Tiffany Wardrobe and Marcus Ego. I watched the bank balance drop lower and lower with a strange sense of satisfaction. Every designer shoe she bought was another piece of evidence I could use in court. Every unauthorized spa day was another nail in their legal coffin. Keep spending, Tiffany, I whispered to the empty room. Buy it all, because when the IRS comes knocking, you are going to wish you had saved that money for a lawyer. I saved the spreadsheet and closed the laptop. The robbery was in full swing, but this time they were robbing themselves. The stakes had never been higher. We were pitching to Sterling Capital, a Silicon Valley firm known for making or breaking unicorns. The Zoom call was projected onto the massive screen in my parents' dining room, which had been converted into a makeshift boardroom. Marcus sat at the head of the table, sweating through his dress shirt. On the screen was Julian Sterling, a legendary investor with eyes like a hawk. I was sitting in the corner just out of the camera frame, wearing a headset connected directly to Marcus' hidden earpiece. The pitch was going well as long as Marcus stuck to the simple script I had written. But then Sterling leaned forward. He adjusted his glasses and asked the one question I had prayed he would not ask. He said, "Marcus, I am looking at your latency figures. They are impressive, but I am curious about your deadlock prevention strategy in the distributed database. How do you handle simultaneous write requests from multiple nodes?" Silence filled the room. It was thick and suffocating. Marcus froze. He looked at the camera. Then he looked at me with panic in his eyes. He opened his mouth and stammered. "Well, Julian, we use the cloud. The cloud is very big and very fast, so it handles the requests." I closed my eyes in pain. That was the answer of a fifth grader. Sterling frowned. "The cloud is just a server, Marcus. I am asking about your concurrency control protocol. Do you use two-phase locking or timestamp ordering?" Marcus was drowning. He tapped his earpiece frantically, signaling me to save him. I sighed and pressed the talk button on my microphone. "Say this," I whispered into his ear. "We utilize an optimistic concurrency control model with multi-version timestamp ordering to prevent blocking." Marcus repeated the words instantly, mimicking my cadence without understanding a single syllable. "We utilize an optimistic concurrency control model with multi-version timestamp ordering to prevent blocking." Sterling raised an eyebrow, impressed. "Multi-version timestamping. That is sophisticated for a startup. Did you design that architecture yourself?" This was the moment for Marcus to be humble, to acknowledge the team, or at least the technical advisor. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and smirked. "Absolutely. I spent 3 months locked in my basement coding that engine. It came to me in a dream, actually. I just wanted to ensure we had zero downtime." I muted my microphone before my scoff could be heard. He had just claimed credit for a system architecture that took me 4 years of graduate research to perfect. He stole my words, my brain, and my effort in real time. Sterling nodded, clearly satisfied. "Impressive, Marcus. Truly impressive. We are ready to move to the due diligence phase." Marcus pumped his fist in the air as the call ended. He tore the earpiece out and threw it on the table. "Boom! That is how it is done. Did you see that, Zora? I crushed it." He did not even look at me. He was too busy high-fiving Tiffany. He actually believed he had answered the question. He had forgotten that without the voice in his ear, he was just a mime in a suit. I picked up the earpiece and coiled the wire. "Enjoy the victory, Marcus," I thought. "Because in the due diligence phase, they are going to ask for the documentation. And you do not have any." The countdown to the global launch of Titan Logistics was ticking away like a time bomb. It was 48 hours before the biggest night of my brother's life, and the mood in the city was electric. My parents were already staying at the Four Seasons downtown, preparing for a weekend of interviews and photo shoots. I was sitting in my apartment finalizing the last lines of the code that would bring it all crashing down when my email notification chimed. It was a message from Tiffany, sent from her brand new corporate account. The subject line read, "Regarding your attendance on Saturday." I clicked it open, expecting a schedule or perhaps a list of last-minute technical demands. Instead, I found a paragraph that managed to be both polite and poisonous at the same time. I read it out loud to the empty room, letting the words hang in the air. "Hi, Zora. We have been reviewing the guest list for the gala, and we have made some difficult decisions regarding the seating chart. Since Vogue is covering the event and we are expecting high-profile investors, we really need to maintain a strict visual aesthetic. To be blunt, your wardrobe is a bit too pedestrian for a black tie ultra-luxury event. We think it would be better if you supported us from home. We sent you a link to the live stream so you can cheer for Marcus from your couch. It will probably be more comfortable for you anyway, since you do not really fit in with this crowd. Love, Tiffany. I stared at the screen. Pedestrian. That was the word she used. She was uninviting me from the launch of the product I built because my clothes were not expensive enough. A normal person would have been devastated. A normal sister would have called her mother crying about being excluded. But I did not shed a tear. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. Tiffany thought she was banishing me to the sidelines, but she had just handed me the greatest tactical advantage I could have asked for. If I were at the gala, I would have to make small talk. I would have to pretend to be happy. I would have to find a corner to hide in to execute the kill switch on my phone. But now I could sit in the comfort of my own command center with 3 monitors and a high-speed connection. I could destroy them without even putting on shoes. She thought she was protecting their brand image. In reality, she was ensuring their destruction. I hit reply and typed 2 words, "Understood, Tiffany." Then I archived the email into my evidence folder. I looked at the calendar on my wall. Saturday night was going to be historic, but not for the reasons they thought. They wanted me to watch the live stream. Oh, I would be watching. And I would make sure it was a show the world would never forget. The silence of my apartment was broken one last time by the vibration of my phone against the desk. It was a conference call from my parents. I looked at the clock. It was 4 hours before the doors opened for the gala. They should have been in hair and makeup or reviewing Marcus' speech. Instead, they were calling me. I pressed answer and put it on speaker so I could continue typing my final command sequences. I did not say hello. I just waited. "Zora, are you there?" My father asked, his voice gruff and rushed. "We do not have much time, but we needed to have a serious conversation with you before tonight." I stopped typing. "I am here, Dad. What do you want?" My mother chimed in, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness she used when she was trying to manipulate someone. "We just want to make sure we are all on the same page, sweetie. We know you can be a bit emotional, and we are worried you might do something impulsive on social media. We need your word that you will not post anything negative about the company or your brother tonight." I almost laughed. They were worried about a Facebook status update while I was sitting in front of a terminal capable of erasing their entire digital existence. "I am not planning to post anything, Mom," I said truthfully. I was not going to post. I was going to execute. My father cleared his throat. "Good. Because you need to remember who is buttering your bread, Zora. We went out on a limb to get you that consulting contract. Marcus did not want to hire you, but we insisted. You should be grateful that your brother is generous enough to throw you a bone. Most families would not hire a failed coder with an attitude problem." The words hit me like a physical slap. Failed coder. Generous. They truly believed they were the heroes of this story. They thought paying me $20 an hour to fix the stolen code that was making them millions was an act of charity. It was the final drop of poison in the well. Any lingering hesitation I had about destroying their big night evaporated instantly. I felt a wave of icy calm wash over me. I looked at the enter key on my keyboard. It was so small, yet it held so much power. "You are right, Dad," I said, my voice steady and devoid of any emotion. "I should be grateful. I will make sure everyone knows exactly how much Marcus has done tonight." My mother let out a sigh of relief. "That is a good girl. Just stay off the internet and let the professionals handle the business. We will send you some pictures later." They hung up. The line went dead. I stared at the phone for a long moment. They wanted me to be grateful. Fine. I would show them my gratitude. I would show them exactly what a failed coder with an attitude problem could do. I pulled up the system clock, 4 hours to go. I cracked my knuckles and turned up the brightness on my monitors. The time for talking was over. The time for reckoning had arrived. The morning sun pierced through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the presidential suite at the Four Seasons, illuminating the dust motes, dancing in the air like tiny specks of gold. It was a beautiful day for a coronation. Marcus stood in front of the gilded full-length mirror, admiring the sharp lines of his bespoke tuxedo. He smoothed the lapels with a reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. In his mind, he was no longer just Marcus Williams, the college dropout who needed his sister to fix his printer. He was Marcus Williams, the tech mogul, the disruptor, the king. He practiced his winning smile in the glass, tilting his head slightly to the left to catch the light. "Today is the day, Tiff," he said to his reflection. "Today we become legends." Across the room, Tiffany was lounging on a plush velvet chaise, wearing a silk robe that cost more than my car. She was not nervous. She was euphoric. She was scrolling through a digital brochure for super yachts on her tablet, her eyes wide with greed. "Look at this one baby," she cooed, holding up the screen. "It has a helipad and a jacuzzi on the sun deck. We should put a deposit down tomorrow morning after the stock valuation hits." Marcus turned around and winked at her. "Get the one with the underwater lounge. We can afford it. We can afford anything we want." They spent the next hour fantasizing about their new life. They discussed which private school to send Jalen to so he would not have to mix with common children. They argued playfully about whether to buy a summer home in the Hamptons or a villa in the south of France. It was a conversation fueled by pure delusion. They were spending money that did not exist yet, based on a product they did not understand. At one point, Tiffany paused and let out a cruel little laugh. "Can you believe Zora wanted to come tonight? Imagine her standing next to us in one of her sad little department store dresses. She would have ruined the aesthetic completely." Marcus chuckled, adjusting his diamond cufflinks. "Yeah, it is for the best. She is happier at home with her computer games anyway. We are doing her a favor, really. She does not belong in our world." They genuinely believed that. They believed they were a different species, evolved to rule, while people like me were born to serve. They finished getting ready in a haze of expensive perfume and hairspray. When they finally walked out of the suite, leaving a trail of arrogance in their wake, they looked like $1,000,000. They had no idea that by midnight, they would not even be able to afford the cab ride home. The afternoon sun was beginning to dip below the Chicago skyline, casting long golden shadows across the pavement as I pulled up to the curb of Leo and Maya's elementary school. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, listening to the ticking of the cooling metal. It was a strange sensation to be sitting in a line of SUVs, waiting for the dismissal bell, while a digital nuclear bomb I had constructed was ticking away on my server at home. The other mothers were chatting on the sidewalk, holding coffees, and discussing PTA meetings and soccer practice. They had no idea that the woman in the dented sedan next to them was about to dismantle a multi-million-dollar corporation before bedtime. The bell rang and a flood of colorful backpacks and shouting children poured out of the double doors. I saw my twins immediately. They were holding hands, a habit they had developed to protect each other from the bullies at their grandparents' house. When they saw me, their faces lit up with a pure, unadulterated joy that made my chest ache. I got out and hugged them both, burying my face in their cold winter jackets. They smelled like crayons and playground air. For the last few months, I had been so consumed with the war against my family that I was terrified I had neglected them. But today was different. Today, I was fully present. "Get in the car, guys," I said, ushering them into the back seat. "We are having a special night tonight." Leo buckled his seatbelt and looked at me in the rearview mirror. "Are we going to Grandma House?" he asked, his voice tight with worry. I shook my head firmly. "No, baby. We are never going there again. Tonight we are having a party just for us." The relief in the car was palpable. The drive home was filled with their chatter about math tests and gym class, the mundane, beautiful details of childhood that my parents had never bothered to ask about. We stopped at the grocery store on the way home. I did not buy cheap frozen meals or discount vegetables. I bought fresh dough, mozzarella cheese, pepperoni, and the most expensive pint of chocolate ice cream in the freezer. I bought a bag of gourmet popcorn kernels and a block of real butter. My bank account was low, but I did not care. By tomorrow morning, money would be the least of my problems. When we got back to the apartment, the sun had set, and the city lights were twinkling outside. I locked the door and threw the deadbolt. It was a heavy mechanical sound that signaled safety. I told the kids to go change into their most comfortable pajamas while I started dinner. The kitchen filled with the warm, yeasty smell of baking pizza dough. It was a sharp contrast to the cold, sterile catering that Marcus and Tiffany were currently eating at the gala. I moved around the kitchen with a rhythmic efficiency, chopping vegetables and grating cheese. Cooking was a lot like coding. It was about following a sequence, executing steps, and creating a result that brought satisfaction. But unlike the code I had written for Titan Logistics, this result was made with love, not vengeance. We sat on the living room floor to eat, using the coffee table as our dining room. There were no white linens, there were no silver forks, there was just hot, cheesy pizza and laughter. Maya got tomato sauce on her chin, and instead of scolding her like my mother would have, I just handed her a napkin and smiled. After dinner, we pushed the furniture against the walls. I went to the closet and pulled out every blanket and pillow we owned. We built a massive fort in the center of the living room, a soft island of comfort in a hard world. I set up my high-definition projector and pointed it at the blank white wall. It was the same projector I used for client presentations, but tonight it served a much better purpose. I connected my laptop and navigated to the live stream link Tiffany had sent me. The screen filled with the image of the grand ballroom. It was loud and gaudy, filled with people in tuxedos and gowns holding champagne flutes. The camera panned over the crowd, and I saw them. My parents were shaking hands with the mayor. Tiffany was posing for photographers, turning her good side to the flashing lights. Marcus was adjusting his tie, looking nervous but arrogant. The kids crawled into the blanket fort and looked up at the giant image. "What movie is this?" Mommy Leo asked, squinting at the screen. "It looks boring." I walked into the kitchen and put a pot on the stove. I poured in the oil and the corn kernels, covering it with a lid. Within seconds, the rhythmic popping sound filled the apartment like tiny applause. I melted the butter and poured it over the hot popcorn, sprinkling it with just the right amount of salt. I carried the massive bowl back to the living room and crawled into the fort with my children. I settled in between them, wrapping my arms around their shoulders. I looked at the screen where my brother was now walking toward the stage to the sound of polite applause. I looked down at my son and kissed the top of his head. "It starts out a little slow, baby," I whispered, pulling the blanket tighter around us. "But trust me, it is a comedy, and the ending is absolutely hilarious." I grabbed a handful of popcorn and leaned back against the pillows. The clock on the screen read 7:59. The show was about to begin. The ballroom of the Grand Hotel was plunged into darkness. A hush fell over the crowd of 500 elite guests. These were the movers and shakers of the industry. Venture capitalists with deep pockets, tech journalists with sharp pens, competitors who had come to see if the rumors were true. The air was thick with anticipation and the scent of expensive perfume. Suddenly, a deep bass beat began to thump from the massive speakers, vibrating in the chests of everyone present. A giant screen behind the stage flickered to life. It played a cinematic montage of shipping containers moving across oceans, planes taking off into sunsets, and trucks navigating busy highways. Superimposed over these images were words in bold silver font: speed, efficiency, future. Then the music reached a crescendo and cut out instantly. A single spotlight sliced through the darkness, hitting the center of the stage. And there he was. Marcus walked out from the wings with the swagger of a man who owned the world. He was not wearing a tie. He had unbuttoned the top collar of his tuxedo shirt, trying to channel the casual genius of a Silicon Valley visionary. He did not wave. He did not smile. He simply walked to the center of the circle of light and stood there looking out at the audience with a serious, intense gaze. He paused for a long, uncomfortable moment, letting the silence build. It was a move he had studied from watching hours of old Apple keynotes. He was playing the part of the tortured genius perfectly. When he finally spoke, His voice was low and commanding, amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system. They told me it was impossible, he began. They told me that logistics was a solved problem. They said the supply chain was too complex for a machine to understand. He began to pace slowly across the stage, his Italian leather shoes clicking on the polished floor. But I did not listen to them. I listened to the code. I spent 3 years in isolation, 3 years of darkness. I wrote every line of this platform myself. I built the neural networks while the world slept. I sacrificed my social life, my sleep, and my sanity because I saw a future where packages never get lost and delays are a mathematical impossibility. The audience erupted in applause. People were nodding their heads, mesmerized by the narrative. In the front row, my parents were holding hands. My mother was dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief, completely buying into the mythology her son was spinning. My father looked around the room, making eye contact with his golfing buddies, his chest puffed out with pride. "See, that is my boy?" his expression seemed to say. "I made that." To his right, Tiffany sat with her legs crossed, looking like royalty. She was checking her reflection in her phone screen, ensuring her smile was perfect for the cameras that were flashing constantly. Marcus raised a hand, and the room went silent again. "Tonight we are not just launching a software. We are launching a revolution. Titan Logistics is the first fully autonomous artificial intelligence capable of thinking for itself. It does not just track shipments, it predicts the future. It knows a storm is coming before the weatherman does. It knows a truck will break down before the engine fails. It is the brain of the global economy. And tonight I'm going to show you exactly how it works." He turned toward the massive screen behind him, which displayed the Titan logo, a silver shield that I had designed on a napkin 4 years ago. He looked at it with possessive pride. I sat in my living room miles away, eating popcorn and shaking my head. The audacity was breathtaking. He was claiming he wrote the code. He was claiming he sacrificed his sleep. The only thing Marcus had ever sacrificed was his dignity when he begged me to do his homework in high school. He had never written a line of code in his life. He probably thought Python was a type of snake and Java was just a word for coffee. Yet there he was, basking in the adoration of a room full of people who were supposedly experts. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. He walked over to a sleek podium where a single laptop was waiting. This was the moment. The live demo. The part of the presentation where the rubber met the road. Normally, live demos are terrifying for CEOs because anything can go wrong. But Marcus looked relaxed. He looked bored even. He thought the system was perfect because I had made it perfect. He thought he could just press a button and take the credit. He placed his hands on the podium and looked out at the crowd one last time. "I want to invite you all to witness history," he said, his voice rising with excitement. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Age of Titan." He reached out his finger to press the enter key that would launch the dashboard. The room held its breath. The music swelled again. My parents leaned forward in their seats, and in my living room I whispered a single word to the screen. Boom. Marcus paused for effect, letting the silence stretch out until it was almost uncomfortable. He looked down at the podium, not because he was reading, but because he wanted to look humble. He wanted to look burdened by the weight of his own genius. When he looked up, his eyes were glistening with practiced emotion. He began to speak again, but this time his tone was different. It was softer, more intimate. It was the voice of a man sharing a deep secret with 500 of his closest friends. "You know, people ask me why I do this," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "They ask me why I spend 18 hours a day staring at a black screen with green text. They think it is about money. They think it is about power. But they are wrong." He took a step closer to the edge of the stage. I sat up straighter in my blanket fort. I knew those words. I did not just know them. I had lived them. Marcus continued. "To me, code is not just instructions for a machine. It is poetry written in silicon. It is a symphony where every variable is a note and every function is a melody. When I write a perfect algorithm, I feel a connection to something greater than myself. I feel like I am bringing order to a chaotic universe. I feel the blood drain from my face. He was not just improvising, he was reading directly from my personal project journal. I had written those exact sentences 3 years ago in a coffee shop at 2 in the morning. I was going through my divorce alone and terrified, and coding was the only thing that kept me sane. I had poured my soul into a text file named Reflections of an Architect on that old desktop computer. It was a private manifesto about pain and redemption through work. And now my brother, the man who thought Java was a coffee brand, was reciting my deepest vulnerabilities to a room full of strangers, as if they were his own. He continued, without a shred of shame. There were nights when the loneliness was suffocating, when the only light in my world was the blinking cursor. But I kept typing. I kept building, because I knew that if I could solve the problem of connection in the digital world, maybe I could solve it in the real one. I did not build Titan to move boxes. I built Titan to move humanity forward. The audience was spellbound. I saw Julian Sterling wipe a tear from his eye. I saw my mother clutching her chest, looking at her son as if he were a prophet. They were eating it up. They bought the lie that this empty suit was a tortured artist. It was the ultimate violation. He had stolen my property, he had stolen my time, and now he was stealing my trauma. He was wearing my pain like a costume to sell stock options. A normal person might have cried. A normal person might have felt violated. But I was past that. I looked at the screen and a cold, dark amusement bubbled up inside me. I smirked. "Go ahead, Marcus," I whispered to the projection. "Read the next line. Read the part about integrity." He did. "And that is why I stand here today," he said, raising his arms. "Because a system is only as strong as the integrity of its creator. If the code is pure, the outcome is pure. Truth cannot be hacked." I laughed out loud. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. He was talking about truth while standing on a foundation of lies so massive it was about to collapse under its own weight. He was talking about purity while committing fraud on a global scale. He finished the speech with a flourish, looking up toward the ceiling, as if communicating with the gods of technology. "So let us not just launch a product tonight. Let us launch a legacy. Thank you." The room exploded. It was a standing ovation. People were cheering, whistling, and clapping until their hands hurt. Marcus stood there soaking it all in, bathing in the adulation that belonged to me. He looked like he had just won an Oscar. He looked invincible. I glanced at the system clock on my monitor. It was 8:01. The speech had run 1 minute long. Perfect. He had timed it beautifully for his own destruction. He was at the absolute peak of his life. He was the king of the world. And in exactly 10 seconds, the clock would strike midnight for Cinderella. I grabbed a handful of popcorn and popped it into my mouth. The salt tasted like victory. "Enjoy the applause, brother," I thought, because it is the last sound you are going to hear before the screaming starts. The applause finally died down, leaving a heavy, expectant silence in the ballroom. Marcus wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead, but he was smiling. He was high on the adrenaline of the moment. He walked over to the large command console that had been set up stage right. It was a prop, really, just a sleek desk with a connection to the main projector, but to the audience it looked like the cockpit of a spaceship. He adjusted the microphone on his lapel. "Now I could show you a video of Titan working," he said, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "I could show you a pre-recorded simulation. That is what most companies do. It is safe. It is predictable. But Titan is not safe. Titan is bold. So tonight we are going to do something that has never been done in the history of logistics software." He tapped the screen, and a map of the world appeared behind him. It was a beautiful visualization with thousands of tiny white lights representing distribution hubs. I have queued up a stress test of 1 million distinct supply chain orders. These are complex multivariable orders involving customs clearance perishables and hazardous materials. A standard legacy system would take 48 hours to process this data. A human team would take a month. Marcus paused and looked directly into the camera lens. Titan will do it in under 60 seconds. Live. Right now. A collective gasp went through the room. Julian Sterling sat up straight in his chair, his eyes wide. This was insane. If the system crashed now, the company would be worthless in minutes. It was a gamble that only a fool or a genius would take. Marcus believed he was a genius. I knew he was a fool. Back in my apartment, the only light came from the blue glow of my monitors. I was no longer eating popcorn. I was sitting on the edge of the cushion, my posture rigid. My children were asleep in the fort, their breathing soft and rhythmic. They were safe. But the man on the screen was about to walk into a buzzsaw. I watched the data feed on my left monitor. I could see the request packet from the gala venue hitting the server. He had queued the orders just like he said. He was actually going to try it. I admired his stupidity. He really trusted the machine that he had stolen. He thought that because he had the keys to the car, he knew how to drive it. He did not know that I had cut the brake lines weeks ago. I moved my hand to my keyboard. My finger hovered over the enter key. It was a mechanical switch with a satisfying tactile bump. It was the trigger for the logic bomb I had planted deep in the kernel. The file project reclaim.exe was loaded and ready. It was not designed to just crash the system. That would be too boring. It was designed to expose the truth. Marcus raised his hand in the air like a conductor about to start a symphony. "Count with me," he shouted to the crowd. 3, 2, 1. Engage. He slammed his hand down on the touchscreen with theatrical force. The massive screen behind him erupted into activity. A progress bar appeared at the bottom, glowing a vibrant, healthy green. The numbers started ticking up rapidly. 10,000 orders processed, 50,000, 100,000. The crowd began to murmur in amazement. The map was lighting up with optimization routes, drawing complex webs of efficiency across the globe. It was working. It was beautiful. My mother clapped her hands over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. My father pumped his fist. Tiffany looked like she had just won the lottery. I watched the live stream with a stone-cold expression. I let the progress bar hit 50%. I wanted them to feel the victory. I wanted them to taste the champagne. I wanted them to believe that they had gotten away with it. The counter hit 500,000 orders. The system was flying. Marcus looked back at the audience, spreading his arms wide, soaking in the glory. "Look at that speed," he yelled over the cheering. "That is the power of pure code. That is the power of Titan." "Now," I whispered. I pressed the enter key. The sound was a sharp, loud clack in the quiet apartment. The command traveled through the fiber optic cables, moving at the speed of light. It bypassed the firewalls. It utilized the admin privileges I had tricked them into giving me. It found the core process that was currently dazzling the audience, and it injected the payload. On the stage, the green progress bar froze. It stopped exactly at 666,000. The number hung there for a second, an ominous digital omen. The spinning wheel of the processing engine stuttered and halted. The room went quiet. The cheering died down. Marcus turned around, his smile faltering slightly. "Just a little network lag, folks," he said with a nervous chuckle. "It is a lot of data. Give it a second." He tapped the screen. Nothing happened. He tapped it harder. Still, nothing. The beautiful map of the world flickered. The white lights representing the hubs turned gray. Then the screen went black. Not a sleep mode black, a dead black. The silence in the ballroom was deafening. You could hear a pin drop. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. And then you could hear the rising panic in Marcus' breathing as he realized that his magic trick had just turned into a horror show. I leaned back in my chair and crossed my arms. The show was over. The lesson was about to begin. The darkness that had swallowed the stage did not last long. It was replaced not by the familiar blue and silver interface of Titan Logistics, but by a wall of aggressive pulsing red. It was the color of a blaring siren, the color of a critical error, the color of blood in the water. The massive 50-foot LED screen, which moments ago had been displaying the future of global trade, was now flooding the ballroom with a crimson light so intense it made the guests squint. A harsh, dissonant buzzer sounded through the speakers, tearing through the polite silence like a jagged knife. It was not a glitch. It was an alarm. Marcus stumbled back, shielding his eyes from the glare. He looked small and pathetic against the backdrop of the massive display. He frantically tapped the touch console, but the screen was unresponsive. It was frozen in a state of catastrophic lockout. Then text began to appear. It did not fade in gently. It was typed out character by character with a loud mechanical clacking sound that echoed through the auditorium. System breach detected. Identity verification failed. Rolling back to original source. The crowd began to murmur. This looked like a hack. A cyber attack. People pulled out their phones, recording the disaster live. Julian Sterling stood up in the front row, his face a mask of confusion and rising anger. Marcus waved his hands frantically, trying to regain control of the narrative. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm," he shouted, his voice cracking. "We are experiencing a minor security protocol glitch. It is just a firewall test, a visual bug. We will have it fixed in a moment. Cut the feed now," he screamed the last part toward the sound booth. I could see the technicians in the back frantically typing and shrugging their shoulders. They could not cut the feed. I had locked the projector input to the server output. The only way to stop this was to unplug the entire building from the grid. On the screen, the text continued to scroll relentlessly, exposing the line by line. Loading kernel history. Author unknown. Error. Author found. Correcting metadata. The silver shield logo of Titan Logistics. The symbol Marcus had spent thousands of dollars branding shuddered and dissolved. It pixelated into dust and blew away. In its place, a new image formed. It was a simple, elegant signature. My signature. And below it, in bold capital letters that were 10 feet tall, the final judgment appeared. Copyright alert. Property of Zora Williams. All rights reserved. The room erupted. It was not applause this time. It was the sound of shock. 500 heads turned simultaneously to look at the stage and then toward the VIP section where my parents were sitting. The name Williams was on the screen, but it was the wrong Williams. My mother Verna looked like she had been struck by lightning. Her mouth hung open, her face pale under the red light. She grabbed my father's arm, digging her nails into his tuxedo jacket. Otis looked as if he were having a heart attack. He stared at the name Zora, blinking rapidly, trying to comprehend how his invisible daughter had suddenly become the largest thing in the room. But I was not done. Below the copyright notice, the screen split into two columns. On the left side, it displayed the Titan code. On the right side, it displayed the original Aura code timestamped 3 years prior. The comparison was damning. It showed identical syntax, identical variable names, and identical comments. It even highlighted the specific lines where Marcus had clumsily tried to delete my name and failed. It was forensic evidence presented on an IMAX screen. Marcus tried to physically block the text with his body. He ran back and forth across the stage, spreading his arms wide, as if he could hide the truth with his bespoke suit. It was a tragic, comedic dance. He looked like a desperate magician trying to stuff the rabbit back into the hat after it had bitten him. "Stop looking!" he yelled at the audience, his composure completely shattered. "This is a mistake. This is a prank. My sister is mentally unstable. She hacked the system. Security! Get security in here!" But security did not move. They were too busy watching the screen. Everyone was watching. The live stream chat on my monitor was scrolling so fast, it was a blur. The internet had seen it. The investors had seen it. The world had seen it. The great Marcus Williams, the visionary, the genius, was standing in front of undeniable proof that he was a thief. Tiffany sat frozen in her chair. She did not look at Marcus. She looked at the red light washing over her expensive dress, and she looked at the exit sign. She was doing the math. She realized in that second that the yacht, the villa, and the private school were gone. She was not the wife of a billionaire. She was the wife of a fraud. I took a slow sip of my wine in the quiet of my apartment. The red glow from the projector reflected in my eyes. I did not feel joy exactly. I felt a deep, cold sense of balance. The scales had finally tipped. For years they had told me I was nothing. They had told me I was a worker bee, a background character in their grand story. They had erased me. So I wrote myself back in. And I wrote it in 50-foot letters that they could never ignore again. The red screen pulsed one last time, and a final message appeared at the bottom. Trial version expired. Please contact the administrator for access. The screen went black. The lights in the ballroom stayed off. For a moment there was total silence. Then Julian Sterling turned to his associates and said loudly enough for the microphones to pick up. Call the lawyers, freeze the funds. I want an audit. Now. Marcus stood alone in the dark, the spotlight gone, the applause dead. He looked small. He looked empty. And for the first time in his life, he had nowhere to hide. The black screen that had just delivered the copyright judgment remained dark, but the nightmare for Marcus was far from over. The audio-visual system, which was wired into every corner of the ballroom, suddenly crackled with a burst of high-frequency static. It was a sharp, piercing noise that made the guests cover their ears. Then the static cleared, and a voice boomed through the Dolby surround sound speakers. It was not the smooth, practiced baritone Marcus had used during his speech. It was a slur. It was jagged and ugly and undeniably drunk. It was the voice of Marcus Williams from 2 a.m, recorded weeks ago during his moment of panic. The recording was crystal clear, amplified to a volume that made the crystal chandeliers vibrate. "Zora, you useless consultant!" the voice screamed into the silent room. "The entire dashboard is red. Everything is down. Fix it right now, or I will sue you for breach of contract." Marcus froze. He looked up at the ceiling speakers, as if they were demons speaking to him from the heavens. He recognized the call instantly. He grabbed the microphone on the podium, desperately trying to speak over the recording. "Turn it off!" he yelled, his voice shrill and panicked. "This is a fabrication. This is deep fake technology. Do not listen to this." But his live microphone had been cut. The only sound allowed in the room was the evidence of his own fraud. The recording continued mercilessly. "I do not know what it says, Zora. It is just a bunch of numbers and code. I am a CEO, not a nerd. That is what I pay you $20 an hour for. Now make the red lights go away before the Asian markets open." The crowd was paralyzed. 500 people sat in stunned silence listening to the visionary admit that he could not read the very code he claimed to have written. They heard the disdain in his voice when he called himself a CEO and not a nerd, insulting every engineer and developer in the room. They heard the mention of $20 an hour. The contrast was devastating. Here was a man asking for $50 million in capital, admitting that he paid the true architect less than the price of a pizza. The recording shifted to a darker tone. The sound of something crashing was audible in the background, followed by Marcus' slurring voice again. "I do not care about the algorithm, Zora. I do not care how it works. I just need it to look pretty until the IPO. Once we cash out, I do not care if the whole thing burns to the ground. I just want the money." That was the kill shot. The gasps in the room turned into angry murmurs. Julian Sterling stood up and buttoned his jacket. He looked at the stage with a mixture of pity and rage. He had almost handed a fortune to a con artist who explicitly stated he wanted to cash out and let the company burn. The investors in the room looked at each other, realizing how close they had come to losing everything. On the stage, Marcus was unraveling. He was clawing at his neck as if his tie were choking him. He looked toward the sound booth, waving his arms frantically, miming a cutting motion across his throat. But the technicians were helpless. The audio file was embedded in the system core, playing on a loop that could not be broken. I watched from my living room, my eyes fixed on the reaction of my parents. The camera feed zoomed in on their table. My father Otis had slumped back in his chair, his face a shade of gray I had never seen before. He was listening to his golden son, his legacy admit to being a fraud. He was listening to the abuse Marcus had hurled at me, the daughter he had dismissed. My mother Verna had her hands over her ears, rocking back and forth, trying to block out the sound of her own failure. She could not deny it. That was her son's voice. That was her son's greed. The illusion they had mortgaged their house for had just evaporated into thin air, leaving them with nothing but debt and public humiliation. The recording played one last segment. It was Marcus threatening me. "Or I swear to God I will destroy you." The threat hung in the air, echoing off the walls. Then the audio cut out, leaving a ringing silence that was somehow louder than the screaming. Marcus stood alone on the stage. He looked stripped. He looked naked. The tuxedo could not hide him anymore. The lights in the house suddenly came up full brightness, flooding the room with a harsh reality. There was no applause. There was no music. There was only the sound of chairs scraping against the floor as the wealthiest people in the city stood up and turned their backs on him. They began to walk toward the exits, leaving Marcus Williams standing in the wreckage of his own hubris. I closed the laptop. The movie was over. The comedy had a tragic ending for the villain, but for the hero in the blanket fort, it was the perfect finale. The silence in the ballroom did not last long. It was broken by a sound that was far more terrifying for Marcus than any booing crowd or angry shout. It started as a ripple, a single chime from a pocket in the front row, then another, then a vibration against a mahogany table, then a sudden cacophony of dings, buzzes, and whistles. It sounded like a swarm of digital locusts descending upon the room. Every single person in the auditorium was checking their phone at the exact same moment. 500 screens lit up simultaneously, casting a ghostly white glow on the faces of the investors, the journalists, and the family members. I had timed the email server to release the blast exactly 60 seconds after the system crash. It was the final payload of my logic bomb. I called it the Transparency Protocol. The subject line was simple and impossible to ignore. Urgent due diligence report. Titan Logistics insolvency and intellectual property theft. The sender was listed as the real architect. I watched on the live stream as Julian Sterling pulled his phone from his breast pocket. He frowned, unlocking the screen. I knew exactly what he was seeing because I had spent the last 2 weeks curating the file. It was not a rant. It was not a letter. It was pure, cold, hard data. The email contained 2 high-priority attachments. The first was a PDF document titled Misappropriation of Investor Capital. It was a forensic accounting of the last 6 months of spending. I had categorized every single transaction that Tiffany and Marcus had tried to hide. I watched Tiffany freeze. Her phone was in her clutch, but she did not need to look at it to know what was happening. She saw the eyes of the women at the next table shift toward her. They were looking at her phone and then looking at her necklace. They were looking at the PDF and then looking at her shoes. The document laid it all bare. It listed the $85,000 charge for the Range Rover listed as server hardware acquisition. It showed the $12,000 Hermes bag listed as client retention gift. It detailed the spa treatments, the first-class flights to Miami for conferences that did not exist, and the 5-star dinners. I had attached the digital receipts for every single item, including the time-stamped photos Tiffany had posted on her private Instagram, bragging about her boss babe lifestyle. The room was reading her diary of greed. The whispers began immediately. Look at the date. That was the day they asked for the bridge loan. She spent it on jewelry. They are not just frauds, they are thieves. My father Otis was reading the email over the shoulder of the banker sitting next to him. I saw the color drain from his face until he looked like a corpse. He saw the withdrawal dates. He realized that the money he had mortgaged the family estate for, the money that represented his parents' legacy, had not gone into the company. It had gone into Tiffany's closet. He turned to look at his daughter-in-law, the woman he had praised as a sophisticated asset, the woman he had told me to emulate. His eyes were wide with a betrayal so deep it looked like physical pain. He stood up, his legs shaking, and pointed a trembling finger at her. "You bought a car," he whispered hoarsely, his voice carrying in the quiet room. "We are about to lose the house and you bought a car." Tiffany shrank back in her chair, covering her face with her hands, but there was nowhere to hide. The spotlight of public opinion was burning her alive. But I was not done. The second attachment was for the tech investors. It was titled Original Source Code Repository 2021 versus Titan Fork 2024. It was a side-by-side comparison of the Git commit history. It proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the code Marcus claimed to have written in his basement was actually written by me 3 years prior. It showed my user logs, my comments, and the date stamps of every major architectural decision. It also showed the clumsy attempts Marcus had made to delete my name from the headers. It was irrefutable proof of intellectual property theft. Julian Sterling looked up from his phone and stared at Marcus, who was still standing paralyzed on the stage. Sterling did not look angry anymore. He looked resolved. He turned to his legal counsel standing beside him and spoke clearly. "I want a restraining order on their assets immediately. Call the district attorney. This is grand larceny and securities fraud." The room descended into chaos. Reporters were shouting questions, snapping photos of the shell-shocked family. Investors were frantically calling their banks, trying to stop wire transfers. The aura of invincibility that Marcus and Tiffany had spent months building was shattered into a million pieces. They stood amidst the ruins of their own ego, exposed as the charlatans they were. I watched my mother Verna sitting motionless in her chair, staring blankly at the red screen that still displayed my name. She looked old. She looked broken. She realized that by betting on the son because of his gender and ignoring the daughter because of her quietness, she had destroyed everything she claimed to protect. I did not need to be in that room to feel the shift in power. I did not need to scream to be heard. I just needed the truth and a mail server. The notification light on my own phone blinked once. Message sent to 512 recipients. Delivery confirmed. It was the most satisfying notification of my life. I reached for the remote control and turned off the projector. The image of the chaotic ballroom vanished, leaving me in the peaceful darkness of my living room. My children were still sleeping soundly in their blanket fort, oblivious to the fact that their mother had just toppled a kingdom. I pulled the blanket up to my chin and closed my eyes. The war was over. The cleanup would be messy, but for the first time in years I felt light. I felt free. They had underestimated the consultant. They had forgotten that while they were busy playing dress-up, I was the one who built the stage. And tonight, I had decided to bring the curtain down. The carefully choreographed elegance of the evening dissolved into absolute pandemonium. The live stream feed on my monitor, which had previously been a steady professional broadcast, suddenly jerked violently as the cameraman was jostled by the surging crowd. The frame tilted wildly, capturing a blur of tuxedo jackets and terrified faces, before refocusing on the epicenter of the disaster. On the stage, Marcus was unraveling in real time. The cool, collected tech mogul was gone. In his place was a frantic, terrified child trapped in a man's body. Sweat was pouring down his face in rivulets, stinging his eyes and soaking through the collar of his dress shirt. He was running back and forth across the stage, screaming at empty space. "Cut the power! Somebody cut the damn power!" His voice was raw and cracked, breaking under the strain of his panic. He grabbed a heavy metal music stand and swung it at the massive LED wall, trying to physically smash the red screen that was broadcasting his crimes. The metal clanged uselessly against the reinforced display, sending a shockwave up his arm that made him drop the stand. He stood there panting, his chest heaving, his eyes darting around the room looking for an ally but finding only accusers. To the left of the stage, Tiffany had abandoned all pretense of grace. She stormed toward the sound booth, her high heels clacking sharply on the floor. She looked like a woman possessed. Her face, usually composed in a perfect mask of bored superiority, was twisted into a snarl of ugly, unadulterated rage. She grabbed the lapels of a young sound technician, shaking him violently. "You did this!" she shrieked, her voice piercing through the din. "You ruined everything. Fix it or I will have you arrested. I will take your house." The technician pulled away from her, throwing his hands up in a gesture of surrender. "Lady, I cannot do anything," he yelled back, his voice filled with contempt. "It is a kernel lock. The system is bricked. Get your hands off me." Tiffany grabbed a headset from the console and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wall, sending plastic shrapnel flying. She spun around looking for someone else to blame, someone else to hurt, but the cameras were flashing in her face, blinding her. She shielded her eyes, screaming at the photographers to stop, but they just kept clicking, capturing every second of her meltdown for the morning papers. In the front row, the devastation was quieter, but far more severe. The camera panned down to the VIP section where the Williams dynasty was collapsing. My father Otis had tried to stand up, perhaps to intervene, perhaps to run, but his legs had betrayed him. He was slumped heavily in his chair, his face a waxy shade of gray. His hand was clutching his chest, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. The realization of the second mortgage, the $2 million loan, and the total loss of his reputation hit him with the force of a physical blow. He looked small and withered, the arrogance completely drained from his body. Next to him, my mother Verna was not moving at all. She sat bolt upright, frozen in a state of catatonic shock. Her eyes were wide and unseeing, staring blankly at the red screen. She looked like a statue of a woman watching her world burn. A security guard was shaking her shoulder, trying to get a response, but she did not blink. She was gone, retreated into some deep corner of her mind where the shame could not reach her. The chaos in the room was suffocating. Investors were shouting at their lawyers on the phone, demanding immediate asset freezes. Waiters dropped trays of champagne, the glass shattering unnoticed on the floor. The air was thick with the smell of fear and expensive cologne. On the screen, Marcus had fallen to his knees. He was sobbing now, loud, ugly sobs that were picked up by the ambient microphones. "It is not fair," he wailed, hitting the floor with his fist. "I deserved this. I am the CEO. I am the face." But nobody was listening. The audience had become a mob, turning on the false idol they had worshipped just minutes ago. I watched the shaky footage from the safety of my blanket fort, feeling a strange sense of detachment. It looked like a disaster movie. It looked like the sinking of the Titanic, and in a way it was. They had hit the iceberg I planted, and now the band had stopped playing. I reached for the remote and finally closed the laptop. The show was over. The silence in my apartment was beautiful. Amidst the wreckage of his career, Marcus made one final fatal error. Instinct took over the logic center of his brain. He reached into his pocket with trembling hands and pulled out his phone. He did not think about the audience. He did not think about the investors. He only thought about the one person who had been cleaning up his messes since kindergarten. He dialed my number. He was so consumed by panic that he forgot the small black microphone clipped to his lapel was still live. The sound of the outgoing call rang through the stadium speakers. It was a deafening electronic trill that silenced the murmuring crowd. Everyone stopped moving. They watched the desperate man on stage holding the phone to his ear like a lifeline. I saw his name flash on my screen. Marcus Mobile. I let it ring twice just to let the suspense build in the ballroom. I took a sip of wine and cleared my throat. Then I swiped answer and put it on speaker. I knew exactly where his voice was being projected. I was about to address the room, not just him. "Hello, Marcus." My voice boomed through the ballroom speakers, clear and distorted by the sheer volume. It sounded like the voice of God coming down to judge him. It stopped the crowd in their tracks. Marcus fell to his knees, clutching the phone with both hands. "Zora." "Thank God," he sobbed into the receiver, his voice echoing around the hall. "You have to stop this. It is a glitch. The system is hacked. Make the red screen go away. I will give you anything. I will give you double the hourly rate. Just fix it, please." The desperation in his voice was pathetic. He was begging the consultant he had mocked. He was pleading with the sister he had erased. I leaned into my phone microphone. I did not sound angry. I sounded amused. I sounded like a teacher correcting a slow student. "What is the matter, genius brother? Did the drone run out of battery?" The question hung in the air, dripping with sarcasm. The audience gasped. A ripple of dark laughter started in the back of the room. Marcus looked up confused. He still did not realize that 500 people were listening to the other end of the line. "What are you talking about?" he screamed. "Just reboot the server." I laughed, a cold, dry sound that rattled the crystal glasses on the tables. "I cannot do that, Marcus. You fired the architect, remember? You said you built it yourself in the basement. So go ahead, fix it. Use your genius." The realization finally hit him. He looked down at his lapel. He saw the red light on the microphone. He looked out at the sea of faces staring at him with contempt. He dropped the phone as if it burned him, but it was too late. The call had ended, but the message was received loud and clear. The genius was a fraud, and the ghost in the machine had finally spoken. The humiliation was not the finale, it was merely the opening act for the real consequence. Just as Marcus scrambled to pick up his dropped phone, the heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom flew open with a resounding crash that shook the walls. A phalanx of dark blue windbreakers moved into the room with military precision. They did not look like party guests. They looked like predators. On the back of their jackets, in bold yellow letters, were 3 letters that turn wealthy men into prisoners. FBI. The music had stopped long ago, but now even the whispers died out, replacing the social awkwardness with a heavy, terrifying silence. The lead agent, a tall woman with a face like granite, pointed a gloved finger directly at the stage. "Secure the perimeter," she barked. "No one leaves until they are processed." The agents swarmed the room, cutting through the bewildered investors like a knife through butter. They were not there for the hors d'oeuvres. They were there for the fraud. I watched from my screen as Marcus stood up, trying to regain a shred of dignity. He actually smoothed his hair. He actually adjusted his bow tie as if this were a negotiation he could charm his way out of. The delusion ran so deep he thought he could network his way out of an arrest warrant. When the agents stormed the steps of the stage, he put his hands up, not in surrender, but in protest. "Gentlemen, please," he stammered, his voice trembling but trying to sound authoritative. "There is a misunderstanding. I am Marcus Williams. I am the CEO. We can discuss this in my office on Monday." The lead agent did not stop walking. She did not even blink. "We know exactly who you are, Mr. Williams," she said, her voice carrying over the silence. "And we know about the $50 million in wire fraud and securities manipulation. We received a very detailed anonymous report regarding your falsified accounting practices 2 weeks ago." Marcus' face went white. He realized then that the trap had been set long before tonight. I had sent the dossier to the Chicago field office the same day my parents took out the second mortgage. I had given them every bank transfer, every fake invoice, and every stolen line of code. He spun around looking for Tiffany, but she was already being boxed in by 2 agents near the fire exit. "I did not do anything," she shrieked, trying to pull her arm away from the officer. "I am just the wife. I do not know how the business works. Ask him. It is all him." She threw him under the bus without a second of hesitation. The agent ignored her pleas and began reading her rights. Back on stage, the reality finally hit Marcus. The agent grabbed his wrist and twisted it behind his back with practiced efficiency. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was metallic and final. It was a sharp click that signaled the end of the Williams dynasty. "You have the right to remain silent," the agent recited, spinning him around to face the crowd. "I suggest you use it." Marcus slumped forward, defeated. The golden boy, the genius, the future of logistics, was now just another criminal in a rented tuxedo. As they marched him off the stage past the horrified stare of his parents, he looked directly into the camera lens. He looked at me, and for the first time in his life, he did not look superior. He looked afraid. I took another bite of my pizza. Justice. I decided tasted much better than revenge. The fluorescent lights of the precinct were buzzing with a low headache-inducing hum that matched the chaos unfolding in the holding area. My parents were huddled on a wooden bench in the hallway, looking like refugees from a high society shipwreck. Otis was holding his head in his hands, muttering about interest rates and foreclosure. Verna was weeping softly, clutching her pearls as if they were the last life raft in the ocean. Inside the interrogation room, Tiffany was putting on the performance of a lifetime. The camera recording showed a woman who had shed her skin. The doting wife act was gone. The supportive partner act was incinerated. In its place sat a cold, calculated survivalist. She looked at the detective across the metal table and did not flinch. "I want to make a formal statement," she said, her voice steady and devoid of emotion. "I am a victim here. I want that on the record." The detective raised an eyebrow, looking at the file in front of him. "A victim who spent $80,000 on a car in one day." Tiffany did not blink. "I was coerced. Marcus Williams is a controlling narcissist who forced me to maintain a lifestyle we could not afford. I had no knowledge of the company financials. I thought he was a genius. Turns out he is just a crook. I am filing for divorce immediately." Through the one-way glass, Marcus could see her. He was handcuffed to a chair in the adjacent room. He banged his head against the glass, screaming her name, screaming that she was a liar, but she did not even turn her head. She was done with him. He was a bad investment, and she was cutting her losses. My mother stood up shakily, walking to the doorway of the interrogation room. "Tiffany," she whispered, her voice broken and pleading, "we gave you everything. We treated you like a daughter. We lost our home for this company." Tiffany turned slowly. Her eyes were dead. There was no warmth, no recognition of the years of family dinners and holidays. "That sounds like a personal problem, Verna," she said coldly. "You should have checked the books before you signed the deed. Do not expect me to go down with this ship. I am young. I am beautiful. I will find another husband. You two, however, are finished." She turned back to the detective and crossed her arms. "I am prepared to testify against Marcus and his parents in exchange for immunity. I can tell you where he hid the hard drives. The betrayal was absolute. She was not just leaving. She was salting the earth behind her. She was willing to send the man she married and the people who raised him to prison just to save her own skin." I watched the feed from my secure server and felt a chill run down my spine. I had destroyed their company, but Tiffany was destroying their souls. She signed the statement with a flourish, the same way she signed credit card receipts. She walked out of the room, leaving a trail of destruction that no amount of money could fix. She thought she had won. She thought she had outsmarted them. But she forgot that I had the receipts for her coercion. I had the emails where she demanded the money. I had the texts where she told Marcus to cook the books. She was running from a burning building straight into a firing squad. 6 months is a long time in the world of technology, but it is an eternity in the world of bankruptcy. The winter snow had melted, revealing the neglected lawn of 1500 Oak Ridge Drive. The grass was overgrown, and the paint on the shutters was peeling, a physical manifestation of the decay that had consumed the Williams family. A red sign was planted in the yard. "Foreclosure auction. Public welcome." A small crowd had gathered on the driveway. They were mostly real estate sharks and investors looking for a bargain, people who smelled blood in the water. Standing across the street on the cracked sidewalk were my parents. Otis and Verna looked like ghosts haunting their own graveyard. My father wore a coat that was fraying at the cuffs, and my mother held a purse that was no longer new. They were watching their legacy being sold off to the highest bidder piece by piece. They were not allowed on the property. The bank had issued a trespassing warning after Otis tried to break in to retrieve his golf clubs. I watched them from the tinted window of my car. I did not feel pity. I felt a sense of completion. I opened the door and stepped out. I was not wearing the oversized hoodies they used to mock. I was wearing a tailored trench coat and heels that clicked with authority on the pavement. I walked through the crowd of bidders, parting them like the Red Sea. My parents saw me. I saw the spark of recognition in their eyes, followed immediately by a flicker of desperate hope. Otis took a step forward, his mouth opening to say my name. He probably thought I was there to save them. He probably thought I was going to buy the house and hand them the keys, because that is what a dutiful daughter does. He was wrong. I walked right past them without even turning my head. I walked up the driveway and stood at the front of the pack. The auctioneer was a man with a fast voice and no soul. He was trying to drive the price up, but the house was stained with the scandal of Titan Logistics, and nobody wanted to touch it. The bidding stalled at $800,000. It was an insult. The land alone was worth double that. Going once, the auctioneer shouted, scanning the crowd. "Do I hear 850?" Silence. I raised my hand, holding paddle number 42. 1 million, I said. My voice was calm and carried across the lawn. It was an all-cash offer. The auctioneer's eyes widened. He looked at me, then at the bank representative, who gave a subtle nod. 1 million to the lady in the black coat. Going once, going twice, sold. The gavel came down with a wooden crack that sounded like a bone breaking. I walked up the steps to the porch where we used to take family Christmas photos. The auctioneer handed me the heavy brass keys. They felt cold in my hand. I turned around and looked at the street. My parents were still standing there, staring at me with confusion and longing. They were waiting for me to wave. They were waiting for me to invite them in. Instead, I looked at the for sale sign and pulled it out of the ground. I threw it into the bushes. I turned my back on them and unlocked the front door. I stepped inside the house that had been my prison and closed the door firmly behind me. The lock clicked shut. I was the owner of the estate now. And the first thing I was going to do was change the locks. The wind on the porch was biting, cutting through the thin coats of the two elderly people standing on the curb. Otis and Verna Williams looked like strangers to me. The arrogance that had defined their posture for decades was gone, replaced by the stoop of defeat. Beside them sat 3 mismatched suitcases containing whatever clothes they had managed to salvage before the marshals locked the doors. They were checking their phones, waiting for a budget rideshare to take them to a motel on the outskirts of town. I stood on the threshold of the house I now owned, holding the brass key that represented my victory. A part of me, the wounded child who just wanted to be loved, wanted to scream at them. I wanted to tell them to leave and never come back. But I was not them. I was not cruel. I was just a pragmatist. I walked down the stone steps, my heels clicking rhythmically on the path. They looked up, startled. My mother wiped a smudge of mascara from her cheek, and my father straightened his collar, trying to summon a shred of dignity. "Zora," he croaked, his voice rough. "We are just leaving. The car will be here in a minute. We won't bother you." I stopped a few feet away from them, maintaining a professional distance. I looked at the house behind me, then back at them. "You do not have to go to the motel," I said, my voice even and cool. "You are too old to be living out of suitcases, and quite frankly, it would look bad for the family image." Hope flared in my mother's eyes. She took a step forward, ready to embrace me, ready to pretend that everything was forgiven. "Oh, Zora, thank you," she breathed. "I knew you were a good girl. I knew you would not abandon us." I held up a hand, stopping her in her tracks. "I am not abandoning you," I said. "But I am not saving you either. You can live in the guest cottage behind the garage. It is small, but it is warm." Their faces fell. The guest cottage was where we used to store the lawnmower. It was a humiliating step down from the manor house. But I was not done. "And since you taught me that everything in this world is a transaction, I expect you to respect the terms of the lease. You can stay, but rent is calculated at fair market value, payable on the 1st of every month. If you are late, you will be evicted. Just business." My father opened his mouth to protest, to call me ungrateful, but he closed it again. He looked at the suitcases. He looked at the cold street. He realized he had no leverage left. He nodded slowly, accepting his new reality as a tenant in the kingdom he once ruled. I turned around and walked back toward the main house. I did not wait for their answer. I pushed open the heavy oak door and stepped into the foyer. It smelled of potential. I walked through the empty hallway to the kitchen where Leo and Maya were sitting on the counter eating ice cream out of the carton. They looked up and smiled, their faces messy with chocolate. "Mommy, is it our house now?" Leo asked, swinging his legs. I kissed his forehead and hugged them both tight, breathing in the scent of their hair. "Yes, baby," I whispered. "It is our house now. And we are going to fill it with the one thing that was always missing: truth." I looked out the window one last time as the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the lawn. The war was over. The silence was perfect. We were finally home. This story serves as a brutal reminder that true power lies in competence, not charisma. Marcus and his parents built an empire on arrogance and nepotism, believing that appearances mattered more than the foundation. They underestimated Zora because she was quiet, forgetting that the person who builds the throne is the only one who knows how to dismantle it. In business and life, integrity is the ultimate currency. If you build your success on the backs of others without gratitude or respect, do not be surprised when they finally step away and let you fall. If you were Zora, would you have given them the cottage or left them on the street? Tell me in the comments below.